I'm not pretending that I'm not biased with Erased. I think it's one of the worst shows I've seen in ages. That doesn't mean I didn't learn anything while watching it. Taking a gander at this colossal mess lent me some insight into my own work and what I don't like about other pieces of fiction. I have a strong belief that most things are subjective. You can come up with measurements, units, and criteria, but being 100% perfect is kind of difficult. Science is based on patterns, and until we can no longer predict using those methods, we have to regard it as truth. It's the closest thing we have to understanding things and should not be dismissed, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% rigid, and it shouldn't be unquestioningly correct. In art, subjectivity is especially valuable to come to terms with. You can't measure what makes good writing and directing, ever. If you do, will it be true for everyone? Doing sequence analysis videos of a scene doesn't really lend much insight into how one should direct, in my opinion, especially on a universal scale. I see it sort of like crafting a narrative, trying to imagine what the original director was thinking in regards to the scene in question. Doing this can help one garner insight into what they personally enjoy as a creator, but when someone sees it, unless they are persuaded by the rhetoric provided by the person conducting the analysis, then it should not be taken as gospel for what good direction is. I don't even believe any creator when they say something about their own work, rather I believe in the work itself. And everyone reacts differently when exposed to a product. Other YouTubers thought Erased was a nail-biting thriller, while I was just laughing throughout the whole thing. What is the authority, and what is the audience's reaction to that authority? The writing of the YouTube author lends itself to scrutiny. Not everyone will agree with me on everything I say, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Use this video and take from it what you will. I want people to be persuaded, but I want you, yes, you the viewer, to think for yourself. Don't take everything I say as truth unless you think it's true for you. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things I loathed about the show Boku, Dake ga Inai, Machi, and what I learned about myself and what I like and dislike as an author and director. If you learn vicariously through this video, that's great. If you don't, oh well. Now that that's out of the way, let's see what we can learn.
Hey, stop! Little girl, stop! Look, I need to borrow you. What the hell is this?
One of the most important aspects to writing, at least I think so, is the world itself. The diegesis, as we call it in the academy. Erased is a period piece in the sense that it takes place in the later half of the 80s. I personally would never really have thought this was the case based on my viewing of the series. If you told me that the setting was in the early 2000s in Japan, I would have completely bought it. Now, I can't be sure about the history of Japan at this time. I don't know if there was a spike in child abuse or murderers or something, or if the case involving Satoru's porn-loving friend was some kind of commentary on the legal system. I'm not familiar with the history here. So this isn't exactly a mark against the show, but it did get me thinking about a couple of other things. Does anime usually consider the setting which it is placed in? Certainly a dystopia narrative does. Psycho-Pass being one such example. Though in that series, it never struck me as being 100% legitimate and believable. There were always things that tore me out of the world, small details, like the use of virtual reality. A primary example I could think of was regards to a certain villain in the show not being questioned in the virtual world. He was restrained and captured. But instead of being safe and doing the interrogation and proposals within a restricted virtual environment, the villain was able to converse with the law enforcement, so to speak, in person and unrestrained, leading to an escape that prolonged the plot for a couple more episodes. It's as if the setting forgot everything it was capable of, but at least the world, the diegesis, was integral to the point of the show. By the same writer, Madoka Magica ignored its unspecified futuristic setting almost entirely. If you placed the series within a contemporary urban landscape, it would have made almost no difference to the themes and plot. The only reason I can think of to place it in such a time is for the sole reason of making it visually appealing. The director of Madoka Magica, Akiyuki Shinbo, has dealt with contemporary settings in a visually striking way before. That is to say, he's managed to conjure up interesting visuals without a futuristic environment. What does the world say in regards to Madoka Magica? Really? Not much. On the flip side, Hayao Miyazaki's fantastic film The Wind Rises manages to capture its setting brilliantly. Motifs from the era can be found all over the place. Profuse cigarettes, trains, developing cities, and the anxiety found in Japan on the cusp of World War II weave themselves into questions of art. Is the protagonist Jiro right in building war machines, even if it's the only way to follow his passion? The setting is integral to the story and characters, even if it is a biopic. Conducting a thought experiment, let's take Jiro and smack him right in the Heisei period. You'd have yourself a most unexcellent version of The Wind Rises. Too much peace, not enough conflict. Propelling back to Erased, what makes the setting important to its themes? Are themes birthed from the time that it takes place in? Are there many clues to indicate that it's 80s in Japan? I am unsure. I do know, however, that its use of the more modern era in Japan, taking place in the 2000s, is mishandled. Based on peer-reviewed analysis of the Japanese legal system today, forced confessions seem highly problematic. Usually they'll squeeze the confession out first, and then sometimes they'll investigate afterwards and possibly release the innocent party. But instead of Satoru being captured and going through a corrupt legal system before time traveling back, showing us the current issues across seas, Satoru just says the police can't be trusted and leaves it at that. We also get some nonsense about a divorce happening through legal accusations of stealing a chocolate bar, but this is so far removed from reality in my mind, it was hard to even consider this remotely profound. I would never have gained any insight into how crime operates in Japan based on the show alone. For that, it's a missed opportunity. A genre is a method of categorizing fiction, usually through observing commonalities. It's that whole measurements and criteria thing again. The American Film Institute defines 10 classic genres, one of them being the mystery genre. MAL, otherwise known as My Anime List, categorizes Erased as a mystery, psychological, seinen, supernatural show. Regardless of the fantasy elements, there is a mystery here in Erased, and it does count in this genre. The killer is this guy, the creepy-ass teacher. Me and my friend Phil were so keyed in on the fact that this was the villain in the very first scene he was in, I eventually would go on to dismiss it because it was just so obvious. Wait, this guy might be the killer.
Yeah, he looks very much like the kid. Did we really need that shot? I don't know, that was kind of ambiguous.
No, it's a dumb shot. It's like, either the show is trying to make us think he's the villain on purpose to mislead us, so it's a red herring, or he totally is, and the show is just dumb. Usually mysteries aren't this obvious. It turns out that he really was whodunit, and that I simply gave the director too much credit. The idea of a mystery to me is misleading the audience, but in a way that doesn't make you feel cheated at the end. If you do feel cheated, that's how you get M. Night Shyamalan. Slap it out of left field.
What? No.
It has to be woven in subtly. There is no doubt in my mind that the director of Erased intended this to be a big reveal. This is the same way he directed Sword Art Online 2, a show that revealed who the killer was in the opening and then pretended like it was a huge twist later down the road. Even if the director didn't make the opening himself, it slipped through the cracks and he should have prevented it as the director. But we don't even need to look at his previous work to know that he's trying to set up a proper mystery. Red eyes are stylization used in various places to show and mislead us into thinking that there are other possibilities of whodunit. Blondie here artificially has darker shadows over his eyes in this one scene just to mislead us. There really isn't a payoff to this otherwise. If Erased intended to be obvious, it should have handled it like the film Touch of Evil, where the villain was pretty much outright stated to be Orson Welles at the beginning, even if the characters themselves are unsure. The audience never doubts. The interest flows through everything around the circumstances and not by the twist itself. In Erased, the directing and motifs are ludicrously condescending and over the top. If you know how to read directing in a typical film school told you so kind of way, then you'll know exactly what's going on by episode 2. At least if you give the writing like 0 credit. The killer teacher emerges from the shadows in the very first scene he's in. He wears a red tie, the very first male to be associated with red after seeing the red-eyed killer. The teacher is presented from then on with low angles or variations of such, a common symbol of power dominance. He also continues to be draped in shadows for several more episodes. This isn't smart to me, this is just obvious. Showing power hierarchy through camera work is great, and it can lend some insight into otherwise not accessible aspects of the film. I've seen it used well in the Coen brothers film, Miller's Crossing. where low angles are used in association with a seemingly helpless protagonist who is secretly puppeteering the entire series of events of the film. So when there's a tense scene with a person being murdered, we know the protagonist is not helpless, even though he seems like he is in the context of the rest of the film. It is an obvious, and it adds a necessary layer that eventually works its way into the ending. Erased doesn't lend any insight into the villain through the cinematography. I think it would have worked better to show a more neutral level camera angles like this until the reveal. Keeping the red tie is something that I think can be done as a way of cluing in the audience without necessarily giving it away. And for hell's sake, Candy? Really? You couldn't come up with a better way to have foreshadowed the climax in the written narrative? Anything earlier, maybe? With more subtlety than this? Surely. This is the universal symbol of a child molester. I know a lot of people were able to guess it, myself included. Everything. The directing and plot culminated to give this away from the very start. It really feels like this was not intended. Let's also touch on how heavy-handed this entire show is with its stylization. Not only do we have this confusing celluloid symbolism being used a la Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood to represent events and memories that happened to the protagonist linearly in the past, but we also don't get it consistently. There are some truly cringeworthy directional decisions here. Guys, did you know red can be anger and blood? Did you know crows are a symbol of death? Did you know the apple means fruit of sin? Did you know black and white makes things look creepy and arty? Also bars.
What does it all mean?
I feel like I'm being spoken down to, and sure, there are some decent compositions here, but it's also weighed down, in my opinion, by the schlocky over-stylization. Feel free to disagree. What can be said for the structure of Erased? Well, I feel like I've wasted my time watching this series. I didn't really get more from the show besides a power of friendship message, but I can get that sort of thing from basically any shonen. Supposedly, this was intended for adults, so that's rather confusing. Its subject matter is too serious for teenagers and children, but its execution and message are condescending for adults. So who was this made for? I know it worked well considering the popularity, but will it remain as popular in a year from now? 10 years? Are people going to recommend this show down the line? Personally, I don't think so, but only time can tell. I'm positive that the premise here overpowered the quality of the writing. I feel like the show could have been half its length. Episode 2 through 6 were almost entirely pointless, showcasing needless information and wasting time on quote-unquote developing the characters. Hinazuki doesn't really have an arc, especially in these first 6 episodes. She's already opened up to Satoru by episode 2, and she's basically a cute object for the hero to defend. The conclusion to her arc is that she gets out of a bad situation, but there's not much of a personality to speak of. I didn't care about her. It reminds me heavily of the little sisters from BioShock, something more superficial to really care about based on the concept of them alone rather than their actual characterization or development. I'm sure this isn't the case for a lot of you out there, but surely you'll agree that the cast in this is expansive. Having a large number of characters for a 12-episode show is kind of ambitious, and almost none of these guys get development. You can cut this one, and this one, and this one, and the story would be almost no different. The only thing it placates to is that power of friendship thing, and potentially to add more candidates to the mystery. Cutting the number of characters down would actually benefit the show. It would make it so that we'd see more development for the ones that really should matter. Satoru's failure in episode 4 to save Hinazuki sets up 5 and 6 as being almost filler-like. These 2 episodes hardly play into the main story, and give me the feeling that this is a giant waste of time, since Satoru's time travel has no rules attached to it. As far as I can gather, it's only when he gets emotional that he time travels. It removes any stakes. He failed once, what's to say he can't go back in time again? He says he doesn't have a second try later, of course. This is just lazy writing. The time travel itself is only used 3 times in the entire series. Once in episode 1, once in episode 5, and lastly in 7. Erased doesn't play with the idea of being a time travel story, pretty much at all. You could easily have made this a tightly woven story about a kid trying to help a friend from an abusive family while murders are happening to other kids at the same time. 6-episode OVA and you have yourself a clean structure. It's not like the anime is faithful to the manga in the end anyway, so the director could have made these changes easily. Kubrick wasn't faithful to The Shining book and it turned out to be a cinematic masterpiece. As for the believability, this ties into the directing once more. The absurdity of the way the abusive mother is presented is simply a caricature of real abusive parents. I have a hard time not finding this mother character to be offensive, especially in combination with her motive in abusing Hinazuki, since that's the only realistic part of the entire thing. She's got red eyes, she's so evil, ooh. This is of course not mentioning the small things, nitpicks if you will. Why didn't Satoru think to try to record the evidence of the abuse? Why didn't he take pictures, video? Why didn't he slip out of his seatbelt when the car was in the water? Why is there a chest-high gate on top of a roof? Why does that gate have a suicide door? Why did Pizza Girl open a door with smoke coming out from underneath? Why wouldn't she jump out the window? Why is she just standing there? Why would a wife divorce a husband over a chocolate bar? Why did Satoru set this plan on top of the hospital roof? Why didn't he collaborate with the police and bug the wheelchair or something so that when they heard the killer admit his plan, they could bum him? Why does the killer care if Satoru would know his future when he clearly didn't and got dunked in ice water? Why would Hinazuki fail to mention a killer coming into the bus until hours later? Why was there suddenly a secret hideout in episode 10? When did they find it? Why wasn't Hinazuki hid there instead of the random bus if they knew about it? If they didn't, was there a better place than the bus? How the fuck did the baby fix Satoru's amnesia problem? None of these things in particular are terrible in themselves, but together they culminate into a series of really terrible writing moments and directorial moments. In the end, did I like Erased? No, not at all, but I don't regret watching it. Doing reviews and analysis have been fantastic for me as a writer. It's shaped how I think about visual storytelling and storytelling in general. Hopefully I've managed to make sense in my arguments and also lend some insight. If you liked this video, make sure to check out me and Honest Phil's entire commentary on Erased. There's a lot more to be said about this series, and I didn't touch on that much here. And also check out my Evangelion analysis videos. Be sure to stick around for what I have coming up. I'm trying to change my video making habits and post more frequently. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.